Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Prince. Join us for a conversation about how the personal is the political. Together we talk about embracing the inevitability of change, deconstructing our unconscious conditioning, and the anarchy of sexual liberation. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, hello, and welcome back. I am so excited to be sharing this conversation with you. It is so powerful to remember that these systems of oppression are deep within our unconscious. Our desires, including our sexual desires, are not just innate. They are shaped and a reflection of our cultural context and our cultural conditioning. And so our relationships, our sex lives are just as needing of reflection and growth, accountability, and change as other areas of our life, because these systems are so present. That's the water that we swim in. And so, dear listener, I hope this space can be one that is inspiring you to reflect on the conditioning of your own context, to reflect on the areas that there is still liberation for your own desire and your own relationships. And when there's so many big systems going on in the world, so much that is out of our control, it is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And within that, we know that the personal is the political. We riot, we protest, and we show up to love the people that are around us, because choosing to love your community, choosing to show up for them, to have those deeper conversations, that is all an act of resistance. And you have a community here. You belong here. And I am so delighted that you are tuning in each week, dear listener. Dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. We have a new Patreon member, Tyrone. Welcome to the community. Thank you for supporting the show. Tyrone, it is you and other Patreon members that make this show possible. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the show, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. If you want to join Tyrone and the Patreon community, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I'm sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. The first question I ask each guest is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
That's a good question. My name is Prince. I am 29 years old. I grew up in Ohio. I come from a Jamaican family that immigrated to the US in the 80s. I got radicalized in high school and in college through, mainly the Black Lives Matter movement, but I have had people in my family be in and out of prison. I also am queer, so that's like a big part of my politic and how I like live in the world. I'm a writer. I am a Black anarchist. I am also an educator, an organizer, a lot of different things, also an
Yeah,
artist. I enjoy conversations about how we look at the world, the function of things, the function of cultural processes, political processes. That's kind of how I guide, like, I don't know, how I post things online or think about things online. Yeah,
great. Such a joy to have you in this space. So thank you for joining me today.
thank you.
I feel like my first big question is how did you connect to anarchy and what does it mean for you?
That's a good question.
It's so big.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I do a podcast where me and my friend talk about Black anarchism, and we talked about that. I mean, I guess for me, in high school was when I first started getting radicalized and I started learning about communism. But I also mentioned that time because even though I was ideologically aligned with more communism, I think I was also anti-authoritarian in certain ways. And then in college again, I kind of started learning that aspect of myself a little bit more, but kind of generally considering myself radical. But I think when I started to really name, like, inclining towards anarchism, it was when after I graduated college in 2015, I moved to Seattle and I basically connected with someone there who was like a student organizer who just graduated, who was basically an anarchist.
Mm.
But I started hanging out with them and their friends and
Mm-hmm.
like just like learning about their political practices. I remember going to Left Bank Books a lot in
Mm.
downtown Seattle and reading, I think, Black Seed Journal. And that was also around the time where I think I was out of university. I was asking myself all these questions about how do I be an adult in capitalism? How do I not be exploited in work? And like I was also working seasonally in hotels where like a lot of my managers were racist. And so I
Mm.
think especially that period of time, like 2016, that was also the Donald Trump election. That was
Yeah.
when I went to Standing Rock. And so I really viewed 2016 especially as a big year where I was like, oh, this isn't just something I talk about. This is actually guiding how I show up in all these different spaces in my life, how I show up socially. Like you're at a party, someone gropes someone, you you go with your friends to confront them and you kick them out of the party, or you de-escalate, or like if you're at your job and you have bad working conditions, like you talk to people you work with, you unionize. I was a boycott organizer in Seattle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, I've just seen anarchy be applicable in many different parts of my life. And especially
Yeah.
as a Black person, it's a useful politic because I think so much of, I don't know, I guess how Black liberation has been reformed again and again and again. I think to turn away from respectability and towards like taking the question of violence seriously as like a colonized subject, like anarchism is such a useful logic for me to look at what I perceive as like Black liberation and queer liberation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your journey and how you've connected to this across the years. Something that I'm sure you've connected with deeper and deeper. And, the further down the rabbit hole, the more nuance you have to your understanding of anarchy, I'm sure. Could you define it? Could you give more language to it? I know it's hard, and I know it's usually defined by what it's not, right? But could you give more language to that?
I love that question. To me, anarchy, or what I consider it to be, is it's a political ideology that is against like a hypercentralism. It's against hierarchy. It's against social domination. It favors our individual and collective autonomy. So if you're engaging in a political space, it's not like the people at the top need to decide how people in this space engage. You decide moment by moment and context by context. To me,
Mm.
anarchism is also like really big into like DIY culture, punk culture, mutual aid. I think 2020 and the pandemic, which is still happening, showed a lot of people like the power of mutual aid. A lot of anarchists like stepped out into different cities, did food not bombs. And so for me, it's like definitely also tied to this critique of hoarding resources and looking at how can we expropriate things from the elite, or how can we share the resources that we have so we all have the things that we need to live: water,
Hmm.
housing, food, healthcare. And yeah, and I think it's, to me, also just like sort of, I mean, any political practice or area or ideology can be stuffy, but I just also think anarchism is a little bit more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the dream, right? Constantly
Hmm.
challenging the systems, but also being radical enough to dream of what it would be like outside of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just like the understanding that I don't know. I don't think anarchism is better than any other kind of political area or tactic. I mean, some people might disagree, but I like that it offers a continuous flexibility that
Mm.
I sometimes felt wasn't there as much when I was more into like socialism or communism or whatever the kind of subcategories of even those ideologies are. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're talking about the sharing of resources and mutual aid, I think about, the ways that we're all social creatures, the way that we all need love. And so I've talked about it, in the same way of food, water, love. And so I'm curious, bringing anarchy into our relationships and what it means to love other people. How do you see that being connected?
Also a good question. I mean, for me, a lot of it comes down to queerness or my experience of queerness, of being rejected by my family at an early age,
Mm,
going to college, knowing at an early age that friends and community would have to matter to me because I understood the implications of like living honestly. And so I think on that one level, like matters to me there. And I think being queer, I feel like I feel grateful a lot of times because I'm like, oh, I'm not as invested in like heteronormativity or the patriarchy. I am still a man, but and I can still commit or have violence committed against me. But I think there are certain intersections that I exist at that make community and love and I don't know, transparency a lot more necessary. Because
hmm.
my friends matter to me, like the people
Yeah.
I share space with, go to protests with, talk about life and politics with. I think it's like I don't know. I just view it as like the way we share space with each other. It's like you live by example. And yeah, and I feel like a big part of like what I hope for in friend groups or spaces or people that I organize with is also this demand for accountability, for transparency. Yeah, yeah. So I think it
Hmm.
shows up in that way, but I think queerness is kind of the first demand that made me kind of like look seriously at like okay, these relationships I've been given can fall apart, just like these systems I'm given can be fall apart. What are the other possibilities and how we can love each other or know
Hmm.
each other? Or how can you see people change and still love them anyway? How can you support people that are locked up or live in your neighborhood? I think like these practices of love in the way that you kind of said like food, love, water, like they spread, I think, ideally.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and so painful to have that, loss of the family structures, to not be supported in our authentic self. That's definitely something that I've experienced as a queer person myself, and my family being much more religious, more Mormon. And so queerness was certainly not welcomed in that
Visible.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can imagine. It's definitely gotten better over the years, but even in that journey, there's still so much distance in terms of understanding of my world. And so,
Yeah.
what does it mean to really invest in chosen family and to build a community of my own choosing, since like the blood relationships don't really fulfill that space? I think that that is a, function of relationship anarchy in terms of questioning the assumption that your blood family should be the space that you invest all of your time and energy into, all of your time and energy into. And what happens when those relationships are abusive? What happens when those
Yeah.
relationships don't support you, right? And I
Yeah.
think that often the queer narrative, unfortunately, this is something that many of us go through, of that redistribution, of having to reallocate who are the important people in our lives.
Yeah. And I view it as I think growing up queer, having family that I was aware might reject me, I don't know, it made me aware of loss and
Mm,
grief at an
sure.
earlier age. It made me aware of violence, like my proximity to violence. And it removed like I think some of the illusions that I think capitalism especially or like Western imperialism gives us, where it's like you're born into this family, you're born into this nation. There are these values that you have to claim that the structure represents. And I think at a very early age, I started to see like, okay, this structure exists and I fit into it, but I'm being told I need to be XYZ. I need to be a man. I need to be a
Mm,
particular kind of man. I need to be good at school. I need to talk this way. I need to not react this way. And I don't know. It's if I'm thinking of anti-authoritarianism, I'm like, it's family where that kind of begins or starts for a lot of people, because if you're born into something and it doesn't make sense to you, how do you find another way? And I think that to me is like one of the core questions of anarchism. It's like, how else can we exist and how can we show people the possibilities? And I feel like I'm grateful that whatever emotional, mental faculties I had, the community I had, or internet and meeting other teenagers, queer teenagers online, it's like, I don't know. I knew at a very early age, I was like, you're gonna have to live in a world where people are gonna tell you don't make sense to them.
mm,
And I feel like that's what the state constantly does to marginalize people, black people,
mm.
undocumented people, disabled people, poor people. And so it's almost all connected in a way emotionally if you look at it. It's like, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about.
Absolutely. And as I study sex and relationships, the concepts of pleasure are all linked to that. You're not having good orgasms when there's so much pressure on all these other things. When you're stressed out, you can't play, right? So anytime that we start to talk about sex, it is so deeply linked to politics. And if you're missing that, you're missing the whole equation here. And so I appreciate conversations that really get into the nuance of that. And particularly in our Western context, there's such a, emphasis on the nuclear family, the two-person kids, fence, property, household, which is not something that we see in other cultures, which have much more community-based connections. And so many of us are also feeling so deeply isolated in this nuclear structure that is relatively new. And so, what does it mean to actually build community that can hold you outside of that nuclear family? Whether you're practicing monogamy or not, doesn't matter. You need community.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting we're talking about this because last night I was up late at night with my friends drunk until like 4 a.m. And I don't know why I'm thinking that we had this conversation about what is a normie versus like what is a non-normie. And I guess this
Mm,
conversation is making me think of like, what is a normal person in terms of like how we share and hold space and what we expect out of community, and what is a non-normative way of looking at it. And I feel like that's what I think about with queerness and intimacy.
yeah.
It's just like I don't I don't expect my life to look the same as the mainstream conception of what like a family or community is. And that's exciting to me because I get to figure out all these other possibilities. I get to learn, I get to meet people. I get to be in relationships that change just as we change throughout life. And that to me is just like, I don't know, I appreciate it because it also allows me a flexibility when I show up to spaces, and because I can change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like personally, my own practice of relationship anarchy has been this deep meditation of embracing change. And what does it mean to actually get comfortable with that? Specifically, when I have multiple types of relationships that are sexual and romantic and platonic and that whole world, there's so many moving variables to that, which is often what I think scares people about the practice. But also, there's been such security in really embracing that inevitability of change for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Maybe to me, a non-normie is someone who can kiss their friends. Because I feel like that's a very queer thing to do. I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely. I kiss lots of my friends.
Yeah.
It's funny, I've gone in my journey into all of this, it felt so non-normative at the beginning to have sex with multiple people, to have affections with multiple people and romance and all of this. And then I've continued to build more community, even going back to what you said at the beginning of stepping into anarchy, is you found this community that was talking about these things and all of that. And now I've gone so much into this community space that I again feel somehow super normal. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, and just the radicalness of how powerful it is to be conscious of who your community is and how much that can
Hmm.
shape your concept of self, where I felt like I was constantly edging society and really pushing the boundaries to step into a world where now I feel like I'm doing just what everyone else is doing around me, which
Yeah.
I always hold the deeper context that this is not normal outside of my bubble here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been so grounding to not have to constantly feel like I'm on the edge, that I'm actually just a part of a normal movement.
Yeah. At what point in your like radicalization did it move from being like something new or something that you were ideologically interested in to feeling like normal or just like a
Mm.
part of your life?
Yeah, I think having all of my, I don't know, the words get complicated in relationship anarchy, but having all of my partners, like four different people that I'm exploring sexual and romantic connection with, all in a circle, talking with me, easily intermixing, them having their other partners here, and just kind of sitting back. I was having a party and sitting back and watching all of that unfold. And it felt really calm and
Hmm.
peaceful and grounded. I mean, that's not to say there aren't days of fear and confusion, but
Yeah.
relatively so, feeling pretty calm and grounded. And it just really, the dream like actualized.
Yeah. 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 No, I think that's beautiful. And I think to me, also, I agree for myself. Like, I think when I started to have more community where I realized our values were shared and they also fell under this thing known as anarchism. And so it's almost like the normalcy aspect is like when people reflect you back to yourself and having
Right.
that possibility as opposed to being in like a world where people just care about individualism or
Hmm.
it's like you're in the rat race. Yeah, and I feel like that was 2016 for me, like when
Yeah.
I was quitting jobs and moving back home, and then I like, and so many things were happening politically. I think the community aspect matters because I realized like who do I feel safe around when things politically or socially or in the world are fucked up.
Right.
And I feel like now we're experiencing definitely a period of time where I think people are asking themselves the same questions and people are turning to the internet or mass mobilizations or whatever it may be to find that community to get that sense of safety. To me is like an element of it. It's like when I realize like, oh, I have a higher level of safety in this space with these people.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like it should be normal, or I want it to feel normal.
Yeah. And it affects our mental health, it affects our energy, right? The difficulties of even our family structures, if we want to go there, the ways that we have to protect and hide at times parts of ourselves because it's
Hmm.
not safe. Again, for the listener, I'm like caving my chest because that's what we do, to protect yourself. You're not going to open up, you're going to want to cave, and how that impacts your energy because you don't feel safe. And then you're having to keep parts of yourself and all of the mental energy going into, can I share that? I don't know. Are they going to hate this? Oh no. And people often in that space feel like there's something wrong with them. And
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
as a psychotherapist, when I'm working with people, I'm like, okay, what's your community? How safe do you feel in these
yeah,
spaces? And can we get
yeah.
you somewhere else? Let alone beyond safety, like just the beauty of intimacy of all different
Hmm.
types of being understood. I am so tired. I keep a very wide variety of relationships in my life, but it is really hard when I start to connect with someone and I open up about my life and I say, oh, I was hanging out with my metamor and we were talking about our shared partner. And then that person immediately starts to say, oh, I could never do that. How do you even do that? I haven't even got to the part of the story I want to talk about
Hmm.
yet. Like
It's
you're,
like you don't even know the worst of it.
or the best of it, to be quite frank.
Yeah,
The best of it truly is I want to get to the best part of it, but I
yeah,
can't because you are having so much come up in your own experience that literally listening to me talk about my lifestyle makes you shut down and it immediately floods a reaction in the brain. And so I've had such, difficulties, I think, in terms of living this life where you have to make that choice of how much do I disclose. And so then when I
yeah,
can find the relationships where they don't stop right there and we can actually continue the story and I feel understood and seen, oh, the expansiveness,
yeah.
the intimacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the phrase that comes to mind is stigma. Like, how do
Yeah.
we build communities or hold community where we turn people away from stigma? We allow them to feel safe, to explore things, to talk about things, to communicate things.
Yeah.
Because if I think of like my friends that on some level I might consider them less radical, or maybe they're not an anarchist. Like, of
Hmm.
course, I still love them and understand them, but I feel like one of the ways that I try to radicalize people, I guess, even just like socially, is like, I don't know. I try to turn people away from stigma. And this is just one example. Like, I have a friend who's getting a BBL soon, a Brazilian butt lift.
Mm,
And like, I think I'm one of two people, like, she's told. And she's like, I don't want to tell people or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if someone shamed you for making this change to your body, would you think that's okay? So why do you do it to yourself?
yeah.
And I think that's like, I don't know, like one way that we can help each other, move each other, push each other, make each other feel safer. Yeah, open up the possibilities of how we feel like we can exist or show up in the world. Because
Yeah.
yeah, saying like, "Oh, I could never do that." It's almost like it's like, what if you said that to a gay person? It would still be
That's
fucked up, or I don't
that's
know.
what
So
they did.
it's
They used
so
to
it's
do that.
yeah, so it's kind of like that same line of logic where I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah, I know. It's tricky. I feel like it requires, because sometimes I feel the same way too when I hear people talk about other relationship structures that aren't what I'm doing, right? Like the idea of practicing monogamy right now would feel like taking my breath away. It would feel like
Hmm.
taking away my ability to laugh with multiple people, to hug multiple people. And so I could fall into the same camp of doing the same thing. They start to talk about it, and I
Yeah,
could be like, I could never do that. But I don't say those things. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
These are moments when we go through the world and someone's saying that. I take a deep breath and realize, hey, this isn't my life. That's their life. And like, that's where I
yeah,
start to think about the practice of relationship anarchy and self governance. What does it mean to trust that, hey, this human is on their own journey and they're doing their own thing? And I know that they are smart enough, wise enough, empowered enough to make their own decision, that my stuff that's coming up about that's
yeah,
my own journey, not
yeah.
theirs. I can take a step back and shut up?
Yeah. I feel like that's like the practice of humility that I
Yeah.
also like in more ideal, I guess, liberatory or anarchistic spaces where it's like, even if I disagree with you, I'm gonna humble myself to allow this space to exist or this discussion to be had or this diversity of tactic to happen as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the humility to not presume that we have all the answers on the best way to live, the best way to show up politically, all of this, to really like take that step back and honor the empowerment of each person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the tricky part of all of this, though, I think too, is how deep are the power structures that we don't even see? You know what I mean? That's what the line I constantly feel as an anarchist working in the space is, how do I talk shit about the systems that some people are still in because they're not aware of it, without being, power over dynamics and maintaining humility? When I look back on my journey, particularly to where I come from now, I mean, I was raised so Christian. I was homophobic to the degree, like highest degree. I was anti-abortion. I was everything of that caliber until I realized I was gay myself, until I realized I needed an abortion. And I was monogamous until I realized I was not, right? And so when I look back on all those different points of the journey, there was so much power structures that were deep within my unconscious that I didn't have a choice about. I was put into this container and it was there. And so then I'm constantly writing this line of, how do we talk shit about the fact that that is so deep within us, but also hold space for the people that are wanting to be there, and being humble.
Yeah.
That is
I
the
I
line.
have an answer. I have an answer.
Go
I
for
think
it.
exactly what you described. I think it comes down to contradiction. I think about like how I was radicalized in high school, and I can't remember if it's Marx or Mao, but they talk about
Mhm.
how every political system will have contradiction, especially
Mm.
capitalism, imperialism, and those contradictions are inherently there in any system. But how we react, how we confront those contradictions, it defines our lives politically, materially. And so I think for you, you were like, I grew up religious, I grew up anti this, anti that. But the contradiction was that you were the embodiment of those things that you were against. And when you began to change is when you began to confront that contradiction. And so I think like when we're trying to let people in or understand or navigate the invisibility of these structures or institutions like racism, homophobia, imperialism, whatever, I don't know, like state militarism, I think we have to be able to expose people to the contradiction. So, like, my contradiction, if I'm looking at like the army or the military, would be Like I grew up poor and there were army recruiters in my high school all the time. It was just normal. The contradiction is they don't do that at white schools in the same way or
Yeah.
rich schools in the same way. And so there's a contradiction in terms of like what I'm being offered and what the intention of this institution is. And even right now with like the encampments on different university campuses, like there's a contradiction between universities claiming to be about intellectualism or freedom of expression, but the
Mm-hmm.
contradiction is that they're funded and they're businesses just like any other business, and they actually will clamp down on freedom of speech at any opportunity. And so
Right.
I think like the invisibility, I think, is exposed when these contradictions come forward, like 2020 and the pandemic. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why did so many people go out to like the George Floyd protests? I mean, to me as a black person, the contradiction was like people care, but they only care in mass numbers, kind of because they're stuck at home and they're bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my contradiction during that time. And I don't know. And does that make sense? Because I think about that a lot, where it's like, how do you make people aware of, yeah, these invisible forces that are around them? And I usually try to be like, you're a guy and you say you don't care about sexism. Men experience sexual violence too. It just looks like all these different things. That's the contradiction I see in what you're, or yeah, like that as an example.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I ask the same questions. I think it's a really deep practice of also living in our own rootedness, right? Living by example, naming our own story, and then not enforcing it upon other people. But that's a really deep question, I think, of what does it mean? Because sometimes I do see some radical people who really hit it and they pin it, and this is the problem. This is it. I've seen, for the relationship anarchy research, I have an open forum that people have submitted answers to the various questions I explored in my dissertation. And I remember one person specifically saying, I'm anti family, anti monogamy.
Mm,
Right. And so I'm like, I hear you. I get it. What do we do with the fact that there are people there right now who are enjoying themselves? But I think that that person would come back and say, are they? Right. In that deeper way of
mm,
the person who signs up for the military. Are they actually, or are they being sold in this pipeline?
yeah.
And so for me, at least, what I do is try to live my life in the way that I can, live my own values, talk about it as publicly as possible, and the political nature of that. But I think it is a really deep question in all these different areas of systems about free will. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I mean, to the question of free will, that's why I also like anarchy, because it's like I get to encourage other people to exercise their free will. We show up to a demo, we show up to a demonstration.
Yeah.
You might want to be in an orange role where you're not as arrestable. I might want to be in a red role, and we communicate that. We work through what our free will is in that space, and I don't know, are transparent about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that to me is also like another positive to the way I look at these things. So yeah, that's why, yeah, because I'm like, even as simple like the anarchy aspect of my life, if I'm going out with a group of friends and they're like, we want to do this thing, and I'm like, actually, I don't want to do that. I'm gonna go home. Like even that is a simple practice of free will that I think is, to me, at least in my life, tied to how being politicized has like pushed me to be more assertive, even in the personal parts of my life.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And I think that, yeah, the question of free will is so complex because when we're thinking about wanting larger political activism, it's about waking up the collective too, right? So when we're thinking about how do we get more people on board, I think about the ways that when I look to my past, I would say I didn't have free will fully, right?
Hmm.
I think about the ideas of Foucault. I think about the deep internalization. And my existential professor was always saying, you have free will with what's within your existential awareness. So, what you currently see, you have free will in. So I did have free will when I was deeply homophobic because I could make choices about what I was doing there. But I've always come back to him and said, yeah, but what's within your existential awareness is so deeply impacted by your culture that it
Hmm.
takes that free will out of it. It's a yes and, where I feel like I
Yeah,
didn't have it because of the circle of deeply fundamental Christians that I was in. And so it's
yeah,
this, I see it as this like deep yes and that's so culturally laden, but in many ways I did not have free will because I couldn't see outside of this box. And so I do
yeah.
kind
So
of hold,
are
go
you
ahead.
kind of saying like it's only free will if we know we have free will in
I
a
guess
sense.
I'm saying we have free will and we don't.
Mm,
As simple as that is, as simple as the yes and of like, I have free will right now, but also I do not because I am a white woman living in my current existential awareness within America, and that's limited. And even right now, I wore clothing to this recording because that's what my society says I'm supposed to do to be
hmm.
normal. And God forbid I didn't. You would be like, what is this woman doing? You know, why are we here? Right. And so, so much of that is things that are outside of my control because I'm in this cultural context. But with my current awareness, I have the choice to say how I want to speak, how I want to show up. I guess that level of holding the ways that culture has so deeply impacted us in an unconscious way, I think is part of the question of how we help people wake up is how do we have compassion for the ways that people are so deeply indoctrinated that they have
Yeah.
no idea what they're doing and also they are responsible at the same time because they do have free will
Yeah.
in that, right?
Yeah. I think it comes down to like knowledge.
Mm,
We all theoretically have free will, but to your point about like existential like trappings or like being born into a certain context, it's knowledge that takes us outside of that context.
right.
It's knowledge that allows us to see and understand another possibility. And I think of knowledge as like literal information or experiential knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe someone is really anti-drug and then they end up becoming cool with somebody in their class and then that person is like, oh, I smoke weed all the time and I also microdose because it helps me feel a little less depressed. And then through that experiential knowledge, knowing someone, like the your capacity for free will begins to change.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, to me, the point of political process is it's bringing knowledge to people, holding them accountable to that knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and based on how they act, then you say like I'm aligned with you or you're complicit. And you can't claim to not be complicit because I've literally said this to your face or you're
Right.
aware of it because of XYZ. And so that to me is like a very material way to look at like that process of change because like I think of like the different points in my life where I'm like I became more radicalized because I experienced something that gave me a deeper knowledge or understanding of the reality of the systems that I'm up against. Like,
Right.
and this is just an example. Like a day or two ago, I went to one of the student encampments here in Ohio, and I was leaving, and like a van pulled up behind me, and like seven cops
Mm,
stopped me and like asked for my ID, asked me how I knew the friend I was with before, and all these things. And I'm just like, oh, the knowledge of being stopped this way is compelling me to want to come back to stand by Palestinians or other people. And it's also reminding me of my racialized position in this world where I'm like, to the regular person passing by, I'm just another black
right.
man being stopped by police for
Right.
what? And so
Right.
and so I think about that where it's like sometimes we turn away from knowledge and sometimes we have to compel people or challenge them to turn towards it, or you have to put the knowledge right in front of them and say you can't look away from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So well said. I was specifically when you were talking about the drug use, I was thinking about the research with Rat Park. Have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So I again, growing up Christian, right? Never gonna touch drugs. Are you kidding me?
Hmm.
Bad. How
That's the devil's lettuce.
totally dare deep. um and yeah, so getting to train in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and learn from Sauna Healing Collective, we talked a lot about the research with Rat Park where um they basically put rats in this cage with cocaine and heroin water, and then the rats drank the water to excess and killed themselves. And then that's kind of where we had this understanding of addiction and drug use for, oh, humans are gonna do this and they're gonna kill themselves with these drugs. Oh no, we need to prevent them. And then someone came in later and said, what if we build a more expansive rat park, right? Where we're able to actually give the rats something to do, something to play with, other rats to connect with. And in that space, they barely touched the water and never drank to excess. And so it radically shifted all of the research. I will say not enough yet, because still, even in my training with other psychologists, there's still people who believe in a disease model and other sorts of ways that completely, despite you present them to research, and they'll still say, but no. And you're like, okay, it's right there. But it's fine.
Yeah.
Um, and how that radically changed everything. And it was really interesting. I was reading Untrue last night, which is all about sexuality and the women's liberation. And it was specifically talking about research with monkeys, where they had monkeys in a cage, and within that cage, the like male female dynamics were that the males would like mount and the females would endure the sex. And language is complicated. I mean, what's
Mm,
really going on in there? But it wasn't as lifeful. And then someone else did something similar where they're like, what if we expand the cage out and build more for everybody to do and other monkeys to be in there? And when they did, the women actually started stalking the men and being more aggressive and demanding of sexuality. And then,
mm,
funny enough, in that cage with the same community, they got bored and then they stopped having sex with the people that they had already had enough sex with. And so
yeah.
they thought, what if we add more people into the cage? The second they add more people into the cage, the women's sexuality came back up again. So if I
Wow.
present that research to humans about all of the couples that I've worked with and relationships where sexuality is dead, and I say, well, the research would no one wants to hear me say that,
Yeah, yeah,
but I'm just throwing it out there for the world. And so I think that's gonna shake a lot of boots in terms of the world of sex and relationships. But I think it's really important to put the research out there so that people can be informed enough to know that
yeah,
maybe they were sold something that actually doesn't fit with them.
yeah. Well, I guess here's sort of, I guess, maybe a bird's eye question, but I guess I'm thinking with like you're growing up religious, also
Mhm.
being in this space. I guess what's your perspective on what do you feel like makes people resistance to knowledge, to like new information? Because I think
Yeah.
some like if I'm thinking of religion, it's like, oh, there's this moral judgment of like, oh, this is the right way to live in this world, and if we do this, society will be better. We will be given like
Yeah.
we'll repent, like we'll have a better afterlife, or like politically, I feel like I don't know, and I think like the process of people resisting knowledge. I guess I just wonder like what you think about that or how you confront that in your work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, immediately what was coming to mind was Plato's allegory of the cave, right? The light
Mhm.
hurts in a lot of different ways. I think, particularly in my Christian upbringing, it was so from a young age taught to me that if I didn't obey, I would spend a lifetime of eternity burning in hell with my flesh being eaten into by demons. Which as a kid is a lot of pressure to take on, but that's what I was
Serious.
taught. So then anything outside of a heterosexual monogamous marriage then would end me up in that camp, which also meant that when I saw other people out in the world, that I also wanted to save them in this
Mhm.
really problematic, let me show you the way so that you don't burn in hell. But I think even outside of that, for people who haven't been raised in that sort of culture, I think people forget the culture that we all exist in within like Western context that has so deeply told us you go to school, you get the degree, you're happy, and you pay your taxes, right? And how deep, if I try to, it's like my sister, my sister's still practicing Mormonism. So you can imagine there's a level of conservatism that is there. And her daughter was born a preemie and she really had a lot of medical bills because she was born premature. And I remember coming to her and say, well, in the next election, I know if there was universal health care, I know what you'd vote for. And she said, no, I don't
Uh,
think we need to go that far. I just think I need a better job, actually. If I applied to a different nursing job, I would
uh,
get coverage. So why does she not take to that enlightenment of that moment? She can't see the world that we're thinking of,
yeah,
hey, this healthcare has been privatized. It wasn't always like this. There are other countries where they don't do this. But her limited focus
yeah,
is that
yeah,
I just need a better job. And
yeah,
so then yeah, in those moments I think it's really hard in that and relationships and sex where we have such a failure of imagination in my opinion.
yeah. I guess it also makes me think about blame. Like,
Mm.
I think sometimes it's easier to blame ourselves than the kind of I mean, I guess sometimes people like blaming other people or institutions, but I also think like to me, I'm like, for your sister, I'm like, why are you blaming yourself?
Well,
Or
yeah,
or and I
totally.
guess that's like economics. I guess that's just like capitalism and economics generally, but like that to me is like I guess something I just learned long ago. Like I'm not going to blame myself for something a system is doing. Like, what the hell?
No, totally. But I think, and so yeah, let's keep running with my research here in terms of sex and relationships, right? So women and infidelity really took off at the same rates as men once women had access to credit cards in the 1970s and had more financial
Mm,
freedom. And so right now there are still people in relationships that the sexuality and eroticism has faded so dramatically. And I get tons of women who say, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And again, if we go back to the research I talked about, actually nothing's wrong. This is predictable
mm,
in some ways. And so there's still this deep question of why do I need more than this one person? Or why is it that I'm having much more fun in my affair, right? All
mm.
this sort of stuff, that same thing that you're saying here. Why is it being blamed onto the person rather than the system? We've been
Yeah, yeah,
sold too deep a lineage of, of a certain narrative, way too deep, way too
yeah,
deep.
yeah. And I guess I think about in 2020, I had a therapist and I was just talking to her about love and life and whatever. And eventually she was like, you use a lot of should statements. And I was like, what do you
Mm,
mean? She was like, you use a lot of should statements. That's usually placing undue pressure on yourself, like blaming yourself. And so like even your sister being like, I should just get a better job, or people being like, I should be happy in my marriage. And it's like,
right,
actually, I mean, you don't gotta, there ain't no shit about nothing. I
right,
mean, other than like just like intrinsic harm and not harming like another human being or yourself ideally, but it's like
right.
the should is almost like contextual because even our moral equivocations are like to your point based on context. It's like to one person non-monogamy is immoral and to another person it is the most moral thing you can do. It's a way to reduce harm in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is where I think about the realities that up until 1993, marital rape was not illegal in all 50 states. And so you could rape your wife legally because she was your property up until 1993. And so this question of I should want this, I don't think people are understanding how much we are healing from
Yeah.
that. In terms of that deep, I should be wanting to do this. That is so
Yeah.
deep within our unconscious of this is how you are a good partner. This is what it means to be a good human. This is what it means to be moral. And it's so deep. Again, I just feel like people don't understand when you come from purity culture today, people gawk at it and say, oh, wow, okay. But people are kind of forgetting the cultural context they're existing in and the
Hmm.
same ways that that is just so deeply ingrained that, like you're saying, I should feel this way, I should do that. And the amount of women that particularly feel like, I should feel this way about this thing, but they don't. And it's going to take
Yeah.
many more of us stepping up to say, hey, I have way more fun when there was new monkeys brought into the cage, you know? Seriously.
We got another monkey.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although the research then shows too that it's only one study I found. It's so novel, right? But it was showing that swingers actually have the highest levels of sexual satisfaction than poly people, than monogamous. And I don't know, I take that to be the diversity of yeah, adding more people. So even in
Mm.
poly, you're gonna hit the same level of problems. If you have two long-term partners, you're gonna hit the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
levels of eroticism and stagnancy and complexities. I think in a different degree than you would with one person, of course, but
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
run into the same levels of long-term stability, eroticism difficulties.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that makes sense. Yeah, like the because yeah, I like that idea of the ranking of it because I've only been in non-monogamous relationships and I'm like, I've had fun.
Yeah, it hasn't been going for you. I'd love to hear about it.
I mean, my first serious relationship was non-monogamous, and like even when I was living in New York, I mean, I dated around. I didn't really like commit to anyone in particular. Like I didn't really reach that level with anyone. But in general, it's just made sense to me. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe pre graduating college, I would have been more inclined to be like, oh, I want like a single partner, like I want
Mm,
monogamy. But I think that was maybe just like kind of like rote societal memorization. It's like I didn't really test it. And then I was just like exposed to like a very queer friend group where people make out with each other and
sure.
some practice non-monogamy ethically, some people didn't. And yeah, I mean, and I guess also contextually, my first serious relationship was long distance,
Mm,
and so I think non-monogamy made sense to some degree, at least for us. But yeah, I mean, jealousy is something I don't really like to invest in. And I think it's weird to have this social assumption that we're all just inherently jealous. I'm like, just like any human emotion, like some people are more inclined to it, some people are less, but I don't think it's an intrinsic trait. I think humans desire each other, and sometimes that can feel like jealousy, or we can read it as jealousy, but I'm like, it's just desire,
Yeah.
really. And so that's where I come from with it.
Yeah. So cool that it's been so smooth for you. I I think about jealousy too if we're having a conversation about anarchy, about the power structures and the cultural context, right? So in some cultural contexts, having, hugging any sort of bodily contact with someone of a different gender is forbidden as
Mhm.
immoral, right? Where, particularly, I believe in our Western context, there is a level of normalization around a hug or a touch, right? So if we kind of take a cultural leap and went into the other space, there would be high levels of jealousy for things that
Mm,
we do in our American culture very normally, right? And so then I think people, again, remembering that now, where, like you said, you were in a friend group where this was super normalized, where there wasn't such a threat to losing, your security with somebody for that. And I think many of us don't have that sort of example to say, oh, wow, this is possible. It doesn't have to mean that they're going to leave me. There's such deep classical conditioning in our brains that, every rom com has reinforced of if my partner were to do anything with anybody else, it means they're going to abandon me. And so the second you see or think about that, there's not even a cognitive process. It just literally goes into the body. Immediate panic. The brain has moved to the fight, flight, freeze of the amygdala, and we are panicking. And I'm so glad that you haven't had that, but I struggled so hard when I think back to my Christian upbringing. I was taught that boys and girls can't be in a room alone together because of course you can
mhm.
only have heterosexual, cisgendered attraction. But that's what I was taught. So when I first was dating, my boyfriend would just mention getting coffee with a friend that was a female, and I lost my shit.
Oh
I
yeah.
lost my shit, And why? Well, everything I was taught that you put a boy in, they're gonna have sex, and that
Yeah.
means that they're gonna leave me, right? Compared to what I'm doing now, has taken so many stretches of imagination. Oof.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm thinking of queerness again because the way I relate to the things you're saying, I feel like, I mean, I guess other than literally my really close queer friends, I feel like two of my best friends right now, one is like a straight woman and the other
Hmm.
one is like a queer man, but
Hmm.
like more straight relationships, romantic straight relationships. I don't know, and it's interesting like seeing how my queerness affects or influences our relationship. Like with my friend that's a girl, like she was married for 7 years and
Mm.
her husband would regularly delete my number because he didn't believe that I was gay, or I don't know, and then like
What?
how yeah, and how I got to witness that a certain kind of possession there that I was like, okay, this is almost like anthropological to me, like seeing how this
Oh my God.
develops over time, like the gender politics that I'm witnessing. And then even with my guy friend, I don't know, it's like we learned to share space in a way that I think is like, I don't know, more soft or intimate or
Yeah.
interesting in terms
Yeah.
of like a more traditional way of like sharing space together on a gendered level.
Yeah.
And so I think even that is interesting, like how our proximity to each other can change like who we are, what the possibilities are, what we believe are
Sure.
possible.
Yeah. Yeah. We gotta rewind to your friend. That's the boyfriend that was deleting your number.
Hmm.
So problematic,
Yeah.
so possessive, so controlling, and unhealthy.
Yeah.
And you know what's
I
fucked
mean,
up
yeah.
though?
What?
Is that some people find that attractive.
Oh yeah,
50,
like they really care. I
yeah.
mean, I'll just give you the rundown. This dude catfished my friend low key on the first date. He lied about being part black because he had black roommates, and they told him, "Oh, you're Indian. Just say you're part black. That'll attract black girls." It worked. They got married. That was her first boyfriend, first date, losing her virginity, marriage, first everything. And
Uh,
so it was interesting, like for me as a queer person, being like, I'm trying to like fuck around in college, and oh my God, he doesn't like me, and I whatever this, and like seeing her, I was just like, you're to me, I was like, you're literally engage. It's like this relationship is almost like a contractual agreement. Like you need to abide by his politics. You need to change what you eat or what you wear. Like, I don't know. And it was just wild for me to witness because I was just like, I don't understand how this is affection, love to you. But then also, it's interesting in retrospect to see her go through a divorce and like,
Right.
I view him as extremely toxic, but she'll be like, oh, he was the best, like, partner I ever had sex wise. And like, of course, their relationship is allowed to be complex and she's allowed to look back fondly, but also be like, fuck him. But it was just, to me, it was just very interesting to see in retrospect. I mean, to really tie it all in a bow, like when they divorced, like she needed to terminate a pregnancy. He abandoned her and like she called me and she was like, I need someone to drive me from Planned Parenthood. And I booked a
Mm,
flight, stayed with her for 2 weeks, and he would show up to her house all the time to try
yeah.
and talk or drop off her laundry or whatever.
Mm,
And so and I guess I mention all of that because I think about the fact that if I weren't in her life as just like a guy who's like, you deserve XYZ, blah,
right.
blah, blah. It's not irrational for you to be a woman and to want these things. Or
Hmm.
like, I think about like, I'm like, what would have happened to her?
Right.
What happens to people all the time? I think is like the
Yes.
other way I look at it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you were there for her because,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think that this just deeply goes back to the questions of free will and the contextual, right? Because, yeah, someone might find that attractive that he's so possessive. And we have evidence of this, particularly with the 50 Shades of Grey and the amount of that flying off the shelves, despite the fact that it was possessive and abusive kink behavior. And yet people are like, oh my God, I'm so turned on. And I'm like,
Yeah. Or
no,
Twilight or any other thing out there. Yeah.
no. So free will, right? So we look at that, we're like, no, right? And I think that even in my work as a psychotherapist, right, if we go even further into abusive dynamics, right, often these are questions around financial independence, frequently inabilities to get
Yeah.
out because of that. So we got the capitalism force going on us. We also have, previous family dynamics that maybe provided examples of love and this being normalized. So when they get into
Yeah.
this type of dynamic, it feels like just what is normal. And so again, can we ask questions about free will in that when you don't have the movement under capitalism to get out of this dynamic, and especially for women particularly, all of that, or different identities and how that impacts that, right? And then also, yeah, the question of our previous examples of relational dynamics. I like I hear about, like, I joked about this in my last recording that I had recorded with someone who talked about like giving her husband a blowjob because he had helped out around Thanksgiving and was being
Mm,
helpful. And I'm sitting over here like, fuck, dude, I've got two men that come over and cook me dinner and then eat me out. I am
yeah.
not giving them a blow. Just
Yeah.
the failure of imagination that when you live in a certain world where men don't do domestic work, that
Yeah.
means that I'm going to give this because that. We need a whole different paradigm so that those people look to that and say, that's possible. That's actually a world. Oh, yeah. And so the question of free will and our what we find attractive, the ways that I used to find men who cried unattractive, that was
Oh,
deep
yeah.
within my
Yeah.
psyche,
Yeah.
okay? And if I
Yeah.
didn't acknowledge that in the ways that that was something that was outside of my free will, and now I have the autonomy to choose how to respond differently, we're missing the whole part of the whole sexual relational attraction thing and how a lot of this is
Yeah.
really outside of our free will until we know so.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just interesting, even on the basic structural level, where it's like, are we engaging in relationships of domination or in relationships of like, I guess like expansion of free will? Because I think about like, yeah, some of the people in my life that are more repressed or like they're in a better version of their life now, and I look at when they were sadder, and I'm like, oh, you had way more relationships of domination in your life and your space around you. Like my friend, like since she's been divorced, like she has more friendships. She's dated more.
Mm,
She's
mm,
had many more considerations about the kind of sex she wants to have, the kind of
good.
partner she wants to have.
Yeah.
And that to me is like that's a revolution in itself. And that's like I loved that I get to see her experiencing relationships that I don't know, show her that she can be more, or like helps her like see her fuller capacity. And I feel like that's some, like, I guess maybe to like the point about stigma or like the context that we're born into, or just even like anarchism, like yeah, I feel like that's like another practice involved in this like way of looking at the world. It's like I want to help the people I love and know be more of themselves, show up in the world as
Mm-hmm.
more as opposed to less.
Right.
And some
Right.
of that is like personal, and some of that is like extremely structural. Some of that has to be like antagonistic, opposing forces that like are against them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then the pain of when you do see that friend going down that path of, oh, their boyfriend's blocking your number, what do you do? Do you immediately tell them, hey, that's pretty abusive, controlling behavior, right?
What did I do? I mean, and in those situations, I honestly can't remember what I would do. I mean, it was interesting to me because this friend, I don't know if you've had people in your life where you can be like, hey, how are you? And they're like, oh my God, things are great, and blah, 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 and blah. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, oh, when I told you things were great, like me and my boo were down and out. And
Why do
it
people
was
do this?
and I think some of that is just like protection. You don't want to look like an idiot. You don't want to look
Ugh.
like some like because like she was having a lot of the same issues throughout this relationship, time and time again over the course of 7 years. And so it's like, how do you come to your best friend again and 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 about the same thing? I mean, a lot of it I viewed in that relationship, it was a careful tightrope between being brutally honest versus being honest enough, but knowing that in the long haul, I wanted to be a part of her life
Yeah.
during and beyond this relationship. And so it's almost like if I pop off now, who is going to be in her corner when she
Right.
needs it? Because I
Right.
know her enough to know how she will resist certain information or how it comes to her. Like I knew for her, I either needed to like be really direct and check in like a gentle way and like nudge and be like direct but not like antagonistic, or I needed her to acknowledge it and then I could like really be like way more heavy-handed with what I had to say.
Hmm.
And so it depended on the situation, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The patience of love, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm really glad that you stayed and that you were able to support her of getting out, because I think what we do know from abusive dynamics of all of the structures, right? From like it's spectrum here. You need community to get out,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah,
can't do this alone. You need community to see you, to hold you financially. You need community,
yeah,
right? And so until you have that sort of structure, it's almost impossible to move.
yeah. Yeah, and you need someone to look at you and be like, you're in an apartment with no furniture. Your husband is not a good person. You probably need to move home, get a therapist, and figure out what could be next for you. Or like even that, like I think is like a part of community, like calling people in at that moment where it's like you need to
Hmm.
like help people look at themselves and be like, and I've had friends do that for me, like when I was working in Montana and had this all these racist managers. And I remember one night, like my manager made like the segregation joke at a party we were
Mm.
at, and then my friends called me and they're like, "We just got kicked out of the bar. We got kicked out of a bar because we got called the N word and we fought these people." And I remember I went to work the next day and I called my friend crying, and she was like, "You need to quit."
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
and I think about like that's a part of community, like
The hard truth.
having people that can look at you and be like, this is not good for you. Like you might be within your own reality or context, but I, on some objective level from the outside looking in, is like, this is the pattern that you're in. And I feel like with my friend, it was that careful process of like making her aware of the pattern versus like also trusting that she's a grown ass woman on some level
Right.
and has to like make
Right.
her own decisions.
Right.
And so I do think it's like an interesting tightrope. But I think sometimes like helping others, especially through like abuse or dysfunction, like some of that I think you have to be careful because sometimes when you want to help people, it almost becomes like an ego thing. You're like, oh, I
Totally.
need to say it right now, or else like I'm a part of the problem or whatever it may be. And I'm like, sometimes help is like a much longer and complicated process, and there isn't this instant gratification that I think the systems that we have, like carcerality or whatever it may be, like tell us it should look like.
Yeah, that complex balance between, yeah, the patience of love and also those moments like your friend who hit it really hard about your job, right? Of like, you need to get out of this dynamic, right? I think for me, I think about the ways in which, one of my friends was telling me that they were going to move in with one of their partners. They're fully poly in this expansive world, which is so beautiful. And they talk about wanting to move in with one of their partners. And it's hard for me because immediately, I've dedicated my research to studying these topics and really getting into the data. And so my brain immediately goes, well, the data shows that women's eroticism dies when they move in to live together 2 times faster than men. And so I look at her and I almost want to be like, well, just be prepared that the research shows that you're probably going to fall out of eroticism twice as fast as he will. So like, don't beat yourself if that's the case. But like, how helpful is it to hit someone with that research? I just
Yeah.
have to take a deep step back. I'm like, okay, I trust your empowerment, particularly in your poly world, to navigate that and do your own journey with that and live into that and figure that out. But the research just flies up in my head and I immediately want to name that as a potential like warning sign, particularly when we've been taught to like do these certain things as the ways that these are things that could actually impact you if you're, again, maybe not aware of them, like the importance of the knowledge that we talked about, but then yeah, the importance of trusting someone's empowerment versus hitting them hard with that. I mean, it's a dance, and every relationship you had, mentioned with Anarchy, like taking each relationship at its own, space and situation. I think the same thing happens here. Maybe this is someone where we've had more of those conversations, so it makes sense to drop that versus someone who's never heard me talk about this. And so that sort of, comment would be rude and presumption of me knowing more about their lived experience than themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also the thing about relationship advice too, because I'm like, I can give you advice based off of what I see, but I'm not in the intimacy of your bedroom or your house. So that's what I also thought with my friend a lot. I'm like, I think this is toxic, but I'm not there. And like, I mean, there are other things too. Like her mom had passed away and he was very much supportive for her. So it's
Mm,
one of those things where I was like, maybe I think I know what's going on, or maybe not. I don't know.
yeah.
Sometimes you have to just give it time to like really assess as well. Like I think that's a big part of like helping or giving people advice. It's like you have to take enough time to listen and really understand the parts of what you're assessing in order to give like actual actionable or like specific advice as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's making me think about harm reduction philosophy and psychology, particularly with drug use and other sorts of relationships that tend to be chaotic, right? It's so important when you have someone who does have that chaotic relationship to a substance, or we could change that blank to a person, a work, any sort of blank there, to actually ask that person, what is this relationship giving to you? What is
Mhm.
this drug giving to you? What, that your friend, their partner was there when they had that loss and death in the family. They are actually giving them
Yeah.
something. We don't just show up for these relationships, unless they're giving us parts of what we do need.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that stability with a drug that's giving you pleasure that you're not feeling in your relational life because of your cage, right? Or in this dynamic, it's giving you some level of emotionality of what you need. And so until we can be really upfront with the people in our lives and ask them, like, what is this giving to you? We're missing part of why they stay, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
again, like how important to give a full community so that they no longer need that from just one person. That's
Yeah.
how we're going to make the shift, right? Is you don't try to say to the drug users, stop cold turkey and you're going to be fine, right? You have to have a whole other world of meaning and relationships that
Yeah.
are enough to get out of that sort of situation and reestablish the relationship.
Yeah. 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 Community. Yeah. Because yeah, see her after the divorce. I was like, yeah, it's just wild. I even have another friend who literally has gone through another divorce and
Really.
like she's literally going through the process of refinding her community. And I'm like, wow,
Mm,
heteronormative marriage can be a trap. It's not always a trap, but it can be. And I've seen it.
right. Just like really isolated, like shut down all
Mhm.
the other relationships in her life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I both examples, yeah. And yeah, and when people are out of it, I'm just like, I'm like, I feel so grateful for you having space to exist in a world where you're not just in service to one person, especially like women I know who have been through divorces. Because yeah, I just feel like there's so much emotional labor that's demanded that
Yeah.
feels normal or
Right?
required or
Right?
necessary. And I'm like, you deserve to like figure out who you are in your life, not in this other person's life. You know what I mean?
Yo, that's so deep. I do know what you mean. It is so deep. Again, free will, internalization, Foucault, right? Particularly for women, the romance myth. There's some level of, in the gendered, all sorts of societal pressure of the man can be the independent person that has all this free, like the storyline of gender here with men is much more expansive than often the storyline of purpose and meaning making for women is so deeply relational and it is one person. And so then that is so deep within our unconscious that we like center that person so hard. You get that one person and the relationship teeters, and it's almost like everything is off because of this one person, because so
Yeah,
deep in our psyche, every single movie, you know what the female character does? She falls in love. She gets the boyfriend. She gets married. No other narrative. Meanwhile, in movies, men have had all the different storylines, all the different
yeah,
stuff. And so that's part of this equation is how deeply that influences the ways that our whole world gets surrounded by one person, let alone the fact that when I am working with my non-monogamous clients, I fucking love having the women that come in and say, I have multiple men who are trying to date me. And so I actually get to choose out of the abundance of
mhm.
possibilities of all of them that are showing up so well right now, what I want. And
Yeah. What they
oh, that makes
deserve.
me so
Yeah,
excited. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think people deserve options, and when you, yeah, especially my friend who was like, it was her first relationship. I was like,
Oh,
where are the options? You don't, where are the options?
yeah, yeah. And it reminds me a lot too of like the other ways we're sold various narratives of our life, right? You go to school, you get the degree, you get the job, you're happy. Let alone the people that don't need to go to school at all because there's other jobs outside of this one path. Let alone you go there and everyone's like, be a business major, right? And then you get out into the world and realize there's so many other things to do. And then let alone that job might change over time. I feel like we do a lot of the same things with our relational world where it's like this very clear relationship escalator of what you're supposed to do, meanwhile forgetting that that's something you've been sold, and maybe you shouldn't have gone to school, maybe you should have majored in something else, and maybe all of it's a lie and way too expensive. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. I think about when I've talked to university students about
Mm,
writing or publishing, or
sure.
especially like living an alternative life or whatever. What I tell a lot of them is I'm like, you deserve to experiment. You deserve to try things, to graduate and take this weird job and then quit and then go here or fall in love, get married for a year, get divorced. And that, like I guess to your to point about like options or being given one path, like I don't know, I always tell them I'm like, you deserve to also figure out what you don't want in your life. Like we're told like all these things you should want, but what about the things that you're morally against or you don't stand by or they don't align with your values? Like find out what those things are as well.
Right. Absolutely. I think previous versions of my, all right, I know previous versions of myself said, I don't want non-monogamy though, because it's too much to process. Jealousy is
Mm,
so intense. So, I'm definitely inspired by your grounding immediately without having to really navigate the complexities of jealousy. And I think part of it makes sense given my like lineage of where I came from. But I'm curious for you, how do you process that? What have you found helpful in terms of finding security and compersion in your dynamics?
that's a really good question. I've never really thought about it, but I think maybe this is an interesting way to answer. Honestly, I think in college, I had so many crushes, sometimes
Mm,
on queer people, sometimes not on queer people. And I think having these deeper, younger experiences with unrequited love
mm,
in some ways gave me this sort of double-edged belief like, oh, like when you really love someone, you don't always possess them like that, like that, and that's what longing is essentially.
sure.
And so I think when I started dating more seriously and I was with my partner and we were doing long distance, like I think like how we entered loving each other, I immediately was just like, I don't know, there was no part of me that felt like I was in possession of them. And I think
Yeah.
that made the choice of us being together more special. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's a part of non-monogamy that I'm also interested in, where it's like we don't have to be in each other's lives, but like we choose to be, and we choose to commit to each other in a complicated world where we all engage with other. To me, it's just like, I don't know, it's almost like how we treat friends. I'm like,
Right.
it's not like you have just one friend, you have different friends that you do different kind of things with. And then the jealousy aspect, I mean, I think maybe you said is compersion when you find joy in other people's pleasure. Is that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for me, I don't know. Also, like I feel like that was just a core part of the way I
Mm,
entered even just friendships or relationships. Like I think that's the stigma, like what I was speaking to with stigma earlier. I'm like, I want my friends, my community to experience joy. I want to see people happy. And
yeah.
so I don't know, even with my ex, like I loved when we go to parties and we'd make out with different people and end up talking
Yeah.
to the people that my partner was making out with. Like that to me is hot. It's not like some weird thing where I'm like, oh my God, like, do they want me or not? I'm like, I'm more like less than my jealousy. I'm more interested in like the pleasure of that moment.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And I don't think it always has to be scary. Of course, there's complicated things involved, but yeah, like even like a year ago, I was dating a guy where I started dating him for like a few weeks and then he was dating two other people, so we'd all hang out all the time. And
Yeah.
to me, I'm like, there's no room for me to be jealousy because your relationship with them is different than your relationship with me. So like, what am I jealous of unless there's something wrong in my dynamic with you that
Yeah.
I'm getting jealous of? And if I'm jealous, that probably means there's something that can be communicated.
Right. Yeah. Said so well. Yeah. That's a lot of what I try to ground myself into of, the joy of other people, the hotness of that. Dr. Jolie Hamilton has done a lot of research on jealousy and, yeah, finding the ways that we feel hot and turned on by seeing our partners with other people is something that's also really normal. I immediately think of cuckolding in the whole kink world, right?
Yeah,
I think that just seeing your partner being wanted by other people can be so hot
yeah.
if
Because
you're,
you get to witness them being a being capable of desire or being desired. Like,
yeah,
and that to me is like, why wouldn't you want to see someone you love be desired? Or like, what's the threat in that? Because it's like, do they only become meaningful because you offer them desire? Like, I
yeah,
feel like that's like the weird possessiveness, especially in relationships. Because I'm like, I don't believe that my perspective, my angle, the way I treat or angle towards this person, I can't offer someone everything. And I in a way, like sometimes I kind of hope that like maybe I could have a friend that could be everything to me, but I don't actually believe in that. And so why would I apply that to really like I do believe there are people that we just are so aligned with and that can make monogamy more safe and like interesting and fun. Like I do believe there's some people you feel like there's never enough time, but I don't think that necessarily has to mean monogamy. And I don't think it necessarily is bad when people are monogamous because I'm like, I don't know, like some of the coolest romantic dynamics I've seen have been monogamous. And I also think it's cool to like commit so fully to one person in
sure.
these ways where like you're going to change, you're both going to change. And I feel like the change element of it, like allowing that there is, I think, what makes the love a little bit more freeing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, even when you are in those monogamous dynamics, you need a whole community of people, right? So it's never just that relationship. No matter what, there's always going to be needs that should be healthy, healthy dynamics to get needs met outside of that relationship, right? And yeah, the choice of the sacredness of practicing sexuality with one person is beautiful, and so many people do thrive in that, and so many people do suffer. And I think that's where I just get the issue though. I read the book Eli Finkel's The All or Nothing Marriage, and like Esther Perel talks so highly about it,
Mm.
and he doesn't at all talk about sexuality. The only thing he
Oh, wow.
mentions, this researcher who does so much research on marriage doesn't talk about sexuality. Oh my God. Okay, okay, okay. The one paragraph that he had was like, so we have these great relationships, but the eroticism fades Do we accept a life of boring sex or a life of celibacy? And I'm saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Eli Finkel, hold on, hold on. So this is just normal? Like you just like skipped over all of the research that you've done on marriages, which show high levels of satisfaction in monogamy, right? Like
Yeah.
again, the research as I have found has shown that non-monogamous couples show higher levels of relationship satisfaction than monogamous, right?
Yeah.
But in all of his research finding that like yeah, people are happy and that the rates of divorce are actually highly predicated upon your socioeconomic status and education. And the higher that you have that, the less that you actually divorce and the more that you have relationship satisfaction. Not shocking,
Mm,
right? The systems make things harder. Okay. But to not talk about sex at all, other than this assumption that it's gonna fade and be complicated,
yeah.
oh, we are missing a whole part of the research. So yeah, if you are thriving sexually in the monogamous dynamic, like more power to you. However, all I see again and again is that it fades. I see Esther Perel writing books about mating in captivity and the difficulties of eroticism. I see Emily Nagoski writing about her own relationship and the ways that it gets complicated. And I continue to ask, why are we suffering so much?
Mm.
Why do we you know?
I
Like
mean, we've been told that something that should make us feel safe, we start to realize it doesn't actually
yeah.
always feel safe. And like,
Yeah.
how do you admit that? It's a difficult thing.
Right. Again, yeah, if the narratives are that something's wrong with me, all of that, right? All of those
Yeah.
narratives that start to get activated that maybe the reason why the relationship, eroticism has faded because I'm not turned on. There's something wrong with me. I'm not confident, or there's something
Yeah.
wrong in the dynamic versus no, there's something wrong in the whole system. And
Yeah.
I think, again, particularly the cultural context here becomes very like important to talk about when I think about it, because again, the more repressed you are, the more space that you have to explore eroticism with one person that feels really exciting and fun. So when you can never talk about sex, I mean, there's so many problems with that and being able to name your desire and consent and all this.
Yeah.
But the tantalizing nature of sex with one person, when you can't talk about it, when you have this whole world to explore with kink and everything and that whole spectrum, there's so much to explore in a lifetime that I see so many people could truly like have so much benefit in one person and the thriving nature of that. As we
Yeah.
become a more sex positive society, we're going to have harder and harder times with that because we have access to a full world of knowing what's possible. The second that you know you can travel the world and have all these different relationships, the cat's out of the bag. We are in a
Yeah.
fully different cultural context. And I think we're in a really interesting time where I'm just frustrated as a researcher when I'm trying to find stats on sex and desire in long-term relationships and there's literally none. I'm pissed. You know what I mean? As a
Yeah. Yeah.
researcher, there's such a big hole. And so I guess I want people to thrive in whatever relationship structure that brings them that much joy. But there are so many relationships where they'll post on Instagram and say, we're thriving, like your friend who said, I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time. And then when I get into the deep nitty gritty of it with some of my friends who are practicing monogamy, and they're like, yeah, the desire has been so hard lately. And I'm like, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
like how much of that is still hidden behind closed doors that people don't want to talk about. And I hear it again and again in my therapy office. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. It's shame, a lot of shame. Like I know in my relationship, like my first serious one, I don't know, I didn't really feel any shame, but I feel like, well, in the relationship, I didn't experience shame, but internally, there were
sure.
things that I was working through around sex, around intimacy, where I was
Mhm.
like, my body is reacting in certain ways and I feel shameful, or I don't feel safe, or I
Yeah,
don't know how to navigate this. And sometimes that it's as simple as that. Like if people feel trapped or scared or shame, it's like that can be such a paralyzing thing where
totally.
you don't even know where to go or how to ask for help, especially if you don't have community or people around you that have some of the language or can offer like something. And so then it just continues. And it's
Right.
almost like, is it just chance that some people get out of things? Yeah, sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think about the first time that I had had sex with the second person in my lifetime. ever because, again,
Mhm.
purity culture taught me I was only going to have sex with one person forever. I failed that. I was on the floor crying in my bathroom. No one's ever going to love me again. The time that I had sex with a second person, I felt so much shame. I felt so bad. I felt,
Mhm.
again, and again, that's being a reflection of my cultural context, let alone the first time I had, sex with multiple people. I remember waking up the next day feeling like I had a scarlet letter and everyone knew I was a whore.
Yeah.
And I could have shut down right there and said, okay, I'm never going to do this again. That was so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no. And so the discomfort of staying in those spaces because I knew the value systems and because I knew that this life was possible is what grounded me in those moments of such severe shame and discomfort. But I'm curious for you, when you look back to yourself in those moments that you were experiencing that shame, what was helpful for you and what did you say to yourself, or what would you say to yourself now with the wisdom and enlightenment that you have currently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, I don't know. I guess I would say with shame, I'd say the simplest thing I would say to my past self is like there is another way. Like
Mm.
you might think that there's something lacking or like something's wrong with you, but there is another way. And I guess I think about that in terms of like something that can matter so much to me right now, something that I feel so shameful about right now. Like give it a year or 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like we have so much, there's so much possibility. And that I guess that's hard to kind of always believe when you feel shame. But then the other part of it is like I think that the more you confront it or begin to like acknowledge it, the less power it has over
Oh,
you.
yeah.
And like being queer and growing up with a lot of shame there, like I realized like, oh, this shame like was a way for me to feel like I had control over something that felt uncontrollable. And that's even like interesting in itself, like this idea that we feel things that are uncontrollable and that we should feel shame about it or it might harm people or it's going to mess other people up. And so a lot of that is like social projection, like people overemphasizing like what their equivocation of something is.
Hmm.
And so I think even to that point, I think with shame, it's like it's important to define what things are for yourself. Because I think a lot of shame is like, oh, I've been told this is shameful. But I
Right.
think especially being queer, like once I accepted it within myself, there was still a period of time where I couldn't really imagine myself being with another man or being in a queer relationship. But then once it started happening and it became like more material, I don't know, like things changed. I realized
Yeah.
like time allowed for things to
Yeah.
change. Yeah. So I think of all of those things. But shame is like complicated. It's powerful. I think someone can rationally tell you that something is okay, it's fine, but shame will still tell you like I need to armor myself, I need to protect myself or
Yeah.
XYZ. And so
Right.
I don't know, it's almost like you also have to give yourself permission to just
Right.
be human,
Right.
I think
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that time, like the ability of time to heal it. I think about the pudendal nerve, literally Latin shame, right? It's deep within
Mhm.
all of our even naming of these different parts of the body. I recorded with one sex educator who does work with educating children on sexuality. Again, the research shows that masturbation with kids starts between 2 to 6 years old. You know how many parents are ready to have that conversation at 2 to 6? Not a
I know.
lot. And
Uh,
so I think that it's really interesting when she was talking about it, the ways that we'll say, oh, and this is the clitoris, like this whisper, right?
yeah,
And how
yeah,
that kids pick up on that. Kids pick up on that energy real fast. And so we have this beautiful organ, the clitoris, that has no purpose other than pleasure and yet such shame. Or even the prostate, right? Prostate orgasms and so much
yeah,
shame around that. Or the idea that one of the most highly researched fantasies is threesomes. And yet if a monogamous couple said we want to do that, shame, something's right. It is so deep. And again, that's the
yeah.
free will, the questions, all of it, right? And what does it mean to actually, what I hear a lot of out of your responses, and something that I try to remind myself is that our initial response is not what defines us. We can
Hmm.
have that shame, we can have the judgment, and we're more defined by, when we get back up and where we go from there. God, I remember, being so deep within this community, so committed to the ideas of expansive liberation, and then going to play parties. And I would watch one of the couples, kind of be together and then mix around with other people. And I felt such disgust in my body. What the fuck was going on there? Like,
Mm,
why am I feeling disgust? And I had to really take some time to reflect on it. And my brain, in all of the ways of processing, had gone, oh, wow, look at him touching all these other women. If my partner was doing that, I would feel really uncomfortable. Oh no. And then feeling that disgust. And I was having such a hard time with knowing that I wanted this world of liberation. And
yeah.
also, I'm having this automatic reaction of judgment towards someone who's living it. And just sitting with that, I think this is where parts theory can get really helpful. We talk about different parts, right? Like I had a whole part of me that was
Mm,
saying, this is gross. And then we can maybe name that my monogamous part. And then my non-monogamous part going, yeah, but you want this. And so I had to get really clear that when I unpacked that jealousy about literally someone that's not even myself, it was
yeah,
the
yeah.
fact that I presumed that they would love me less, that they would leave me. And that being what was really at the heart of that initial
Mm,
disgust of, if I saw my partner do this, it would be a sign that they don't care about me enough, or
yeah.
even all of
Or
that. Like
they're
there's,
not as committed or yeah.
yeah, so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I've talked about like seeing my partner hold hands with somebody else and how that was so deeply more threatening than the actual sexual space of sharing with them. And it's
Yeah.
so fucking wild because he's holding her hand, caressing her hand, and I'm losing my shit. Meanwhile, he could be doing that to his mom. Like this act of holding hands, like it
Yeah,
is
yeah.
so,
It's
yeah.
simple. Yeah.
Right. What's
Yeah.
deep? It's deep.
It's also it's also even interesting. I guess haven't really thought of this way because you mentioned threesomes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like my own relationship and non-monogamy. I'm like, I literally lost my virginity in a threesome. So I'm like, I guess like non-monogamy, it was just always
I
there.
love
Because to me,
that.
I'm just like, it just always has made sense. I'm like,
That makes
what's the
sense.
problem? There is no problem. And so I guess I also think that what shame too is I'm like, sometimes I also have to ask myself, I'm like, what's the big deal?
Well, there's a lot of big deals about the sex stuff. There's a lot of big
Yeah,
deals.
but then I guess I asked that question in terms of like, what's the big deal in terms of like, if I literally don't tell anyone what I'm doing, what's the big deal? Or
Yeah.
not, like, I don't mean that I'm like, I'm not gonna tell people because it's shameful, but it's like, if I have the free will and I can do this thing and no one knows, where's the shame coming from other than myself? And I don't have to feel that way because I don't know, because I also think like with shame and fear, like sometimes we fear things that we actually really desire on
Oh,
some level. And
sure.
so it's like to that point as well, it's like you can feel like internal resistance, but that doesn't stop everyone from doing things. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go back to my homophobic self. Like I actually was really gay. I just didn't know, So
mhm,
like I really wanted that thing that I said no, no, no to. And
yeah,
I think again, I'm so glad that your first time was a threesome. How liberating, how exciting, right? And I just think people forget how deeply ingrained this is within our unconscious. And I love that you felt that space to go for that. That was one of the most wild things for me to do and took so many years of sexual liberation to get to. And our positionality was different. We started in
yeah,
different spaces with the cultural context of this. And again, particularly within colonizer religious structures, there is such deep emphasis on purity and what it means to have
yeah,
sex with one person. And it created this whole narrative of what sexuality is, which makes sense when we think about it. Like, talk about controlling the masses, the pleasure of sexuality
yeah,
and literal birth of human. I mean, it makes sense that they would get really tight on this. And so I think people forget that that is so deep because when we look at other cultures where sex work is legal and the amount of communication that exists around sexuality in those cultures, it is not the deeply repressed taboo thing. But when I talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
sex work here in the United States, people lose their shit. And the
yeah.
only way that they
People
can
think
imagine,
it's people
yeah,
think it's wild. Like not everything is
yeah,
trafficking.
right. That's the big thing is that they always see it as trafficking, let alone like dominatrix who have chosen this line of work
Yeah,
beyond their business job that had all the benefits because the work of being a dominatrix is so
yeah,
fun and enjoyable. There's obviously a lot of privilege in that, right?
yeah, yeah.
But like they
But
just
it,
can't even
yeah.
see it.
And when people are against sex work, I'm like, you're against sex work. What kind of sex work?
Yeah.
Because if they can't even name it, I'm like, you don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. Yeah. Have you ever read
Right.
it's a column. I think it was also published as like a small book. Have you ever read
Mm.
The Tricking Hour?
No, but I'll write it down.
It's a collection that my friend wrote. But basically they lived down south and they wrote I think a monthly column about their experiences as a sex worker and an
Mm,
anarchist.
mm,
And it's really beautiful essays about like the body,
cool.
queerness, bodily autonomy, how getting into mixed martial arts like grounded them in their body through
Cool.
some of the trauma that can just be inherent in sex work and
Hmm.
like the active performance. I don't know. It's really, I feel like you'd enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, I wrote it down. I'll have to check it out for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's again a point of failure of imagination to understand that there's people who choose this as much as anyone can choose any profession under capitalism, right? I think we can also ask questions there, but
Mhm.
who
There
choose this,
yeah,
right?
some people are doctors, some people are police officers, some people are sex workers. Those all have
Right.
different, I don't know, like social considerations. But I don't know. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's like interesting to think about even in that standpoint. Yeah.
Right, right. And whether you've been through the trauma of purity culture, the trauma of colonizing religions, I do find it to be a trauma response when I look back at my own history and when I work with clients, and I hear this again and again. I was once asked, "How do you like to be touched?" And I froze. I had no response. I had gone into freeze and I couldn't name how I like to be touched. And I work with so many people who can't name that. That is a trauma response to the access of our pleasure because of
Mm,
shame and of all of these systems and all of the ways that is so deeply within us that we can't even talk about the ways that, again, regardless of what body you have, it has literal organs that are meant to bring you pleasure.
yeah.
How wild is it that we live in a society that we can't talk about that? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Repression, lots of repression. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a joy to have you on the show and get to talk about the anarchy of relationships and sexuality. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fun. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
totally. I'm going to take a deep breath with you now. And so I always ask towards the end of my time with each guest if there's anything else that you want to share with the listeners. Otherwise, I can guide us towards a closing question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would just say I really appreciate this conversation because I think it's important to unpack how we approach, how we treat each other, how we look at the world, how the ways that we look at the world affects how we treat each other. And it's something I'm especially thinking of now, of course, like so many protests are happening all around the country about Palestine. And to me, literally the process of humanizing each other is like taking seriously how we treat each other
Yeah.
and what that looks like structurally, individually. So I appreciate you holding this space. It's meaningful.
Yeah. Thank you. And I appreciate you co creating the conversation. Each one is so unique. Each person brings such a different flavor. And it really is a joy anytime I get to talk to an anarchist. All right. Well, if you feel good, I can guide us towards our closing question.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the one question that I ask everyone on the show is, what's one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Mm. Hmm. To me, it's as easy as I wish more people knew that people are resisting systems of domination and exploitation everywhere. It's like, it's as simple as the old lady in your neighborhood cooking plates of food that she sells
Yeah.
for real cheap. It's as simple as like little queer kids going to school and normalizing like just being public and out. And it's as normal as people doing food not bombs and doing serves and sharing resources. Like I think the better world is all around us. And we have also every reason to be cynical, but I think we also
Right.
have every reason to believe that things can and will, and we have the possibility of things getting better because it's already all around us. Like I really believe that. And it's something I hope I never lose sight of because I'm just like I don't necessarily believe all of these things will change within my lifetime, but I think the
Right.
pursuit of that change is highly meaningful. And it's like that's how you make meaning out of life, essentially. Like you don't just
Mm-hmm.
take what's been given to you, you define it for yourself, as I kind of mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So well said. Yeah. Really trusting in the ripples of that long-term work across generations that will hopefully, pending climate change, live much longer than us, right? And
Mhm.
get to see the work that we're doing right now through these acts in our community and the conversations that we're having in our respective spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was such a joy to have you. I want to hold some space too for all of the people that have connected with you and really enjoyed your perspective and your insight. Where can they find your content?
Yeah. I have a website, princeshakur.com. I'm on social media. So on Instagram, it's at Sweet Black Prince. On TikTok, I post a lot about capitalism, writing, politics. I'm at PRSHAKUR on there. And I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about writing, travel, politics. And I also run a podcast called The Dugout, where me and my co-host Jordan talk about Black anarchism. And we use our kind of perspective to look at like news, culture, life. So any of those places.
Yeah, absolutely. I have all of it linked in the show notes below. And again, a big thank you to joining me and all of the listeners today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.